You are at that age where most people would be struggling with technology, and yet for many, many years you knew a lot more about YouTube than I ever did. How on earth did you get such an interest in YouTube, and where did the journey all begin with you?
Well, I basically started around about 2011, 2012, Stuart. And even back then, people were saying, "Oh, you'll never be able to break into YouTube in a meaningful way." But I wanted to promote some of my own content because I write quite a bit for church groups and publish a little bit. And we'll come to that later in our discussion. But that's how it began. Way back then, I wanted to find another way of expressing the same thing I was writing about.
What were you writing about, sort of in your print books?
Well, we started actually printing material, little zines like this, way back in 2003. And we started from our parish, a church based publishing group, and absolutely everything in that was produced by hand. We hand bound books, we stapled together zines, you name it, and we produced. I don't know, 4 or 5 thousand different works. I mean, 4 or 5 thousand copies of various publications here. But the YouTube thing began, as I say, 2011, 2012, when I realized that there had to be other ways of getting the same content out to an audience. And since then, I've experimented with a sort of a combined approach to print and YouTube. But my YouTube channel, I've got to tell you the absolute truth, Stuart Macadam. I haven't posted a thing to YouTube in the last 6 months or so. And I've been doing it kind of as an experiment to see what would happen with the analytics, the views and so on.
What are your stats on your YouTube channel in terms of subscribers and watch time that you've accumulated like over your lifetime?
Channel lifetime, we've probably got about, I haven't looked at it, say 700,000 watched hours. We've got just over 1K subscribers, maybe about 1.6, 1.1 rather. And it just ticks over. The last 6 months where I haven't posted anything, I've been very interested. The number of views has gone down, the total number of new people viewing has gone down. But we would expect that. The algorithm tells us that if you don't post, you don't get results. But at the same time, because I'm now getting to be an old man, I don't really want to post every week. There are a few more things that I want to do, but it's I guess what I learnt, Stuart, and you and I went through this about 3, 4 years ago when we published a booklet together. I hope you'll talk about that. But what I decided was if you have a niche market, it's really about not how much you publish, but how well you publish on YouTube or in print to that niche. How will you publish?
It's interesting that you mentioned that because if you look at some of the bigger YouTubers out there, like Mr. Beast and PewDiePie and a lot of these other bigger players, they're not actually posting every single day or twice a day or even once a week. Like, I mean, Mr. Beast, it's not uncommon for him now to only upload, say, a video a month. Not just because of the sheer
Ah,
scale that's required for him to make those videos, but also just with the editing process and putting together good content. And sometimes you do find that posting less frequently but with higher quality content actually helps you move the needle a lot more, so long as you're doing it on set dates, I would say, particularly for the smaller to mid-sized channels, like our ones are. And one thing that David just mentioned before is that we have the 3 minutes of your time booklet that we co-wrote together, tips for better social media engagement, and there is an audio version on my channel that you can go and listen to. It is quite a quick read or listen, depending on how you want to consume the content. And if you want a physical copy of it, we've actually got 20 copies that we are prepared to give away to anybody. Just leave a comment down below and you can be potentially one of 20 people that can walk away with a free copy of it. So,
well, Stuart, we should say when we wrote that book together, I'd used part of my material before within a massive course called the Effective Church Leaders course. And then I've used it for my purposes, you've used it for your purposes, and my guess is that it's probably we've given away about 1,000 copies all up in various formats.
easily, and it's been very well received because people could see that a lot of time and care was put into the process of making sure there was no wasted space, not just with the visual layout, but also with the words that we included too. And I remember, I think it was your daughter that did some of the editing in the book, where I think she just took out a whole paragraph at one point because she said that it just wasn't necessary because we repeated a lot of the same stuff in previous spaces. And I think that's something that a professional eye catches. But coming back to your background, what exactly is your background, David? Tell us a bit more about, you know, how you got
Yeah,
started with all of this, and I suppose then we can move on to the niche part of YouTube that you were able to conquer.
yeah, okay. My context is that when I started working life, I qualified in mathematics. So I taught high school maths for 3 or 4 years, and then I felt a call to Methodist ministry, and really the whole of my working life has been devoted to the Methodist Church of New Zealand. Um, and but I was never able to leave aside the mathematics that I'd learned at university. And what I really think, Stuart, is important is that everyone's got to have a passion. Now, I know from talking to you over years, you've got a passion for trying to understand some of how the theology works with some of the world's best theological thinkers, and you can quote chapter and verse of them. But you've also got a passion for your work as a social media marketer. And my goodness, what if you put the two together and you suddenly got, double the passion, double the output? And
Absolutely, and
that's what I learned off you.
yeah, well, I mean, it's good that you keep that open mind because I was having a chat with a friend the other day, and they said like, oh, my grandpa he passed away a couple of years ago, and he never had a computer, he never had an email address, he could barely switch a computer on, and yet here you are into your 70s now with such a remarkably open mind and willingness to adapt and use the technology that's available to you. Was that something that you could foresee when the internet first came along and personal computers came along, that it was going to have quite a big influence in how the Methodist Church communicated its message and its values?
Yeah, definitely. I showed you that first little zine we published. We did on an ancient machine now called a risograph. Very different technology from today's high quality laser output. But we learned a lot over the time. Now, this is a booklet I recently put together, a zine called The Soul, A Biblical Alchemy by Carl Jung. And there's very little difference in how we laid it out. Basically, it's all about page design. It's not just the content you've got to be able to design it well. And that's what I most appreciated about one of your very recent videos. It was an instruction, I think, on how to use, was it Reddit or the other, Quora? And I watched this through the whole way, and I thought, Now, here's a great example of instructional video. How you got into the subject, how you were going to use the layout that was before you on screen to go through to create your ads and your audience and so on. And I thought, if I was trying to learn about how, as a beginner, I could use social media to market my product, this is exactly what I'd want to see on a YouTube channel. I thought it was very, very well done. So you had instructional design at the back of your mind, and you designed your video very, very well. It was highly sequential. This is another zine that we've just put out. This is the latest one. It's on poetry, three of my favourite poems on how we interpreted a theological subject. And again, it's all about design. How can you get your concepts? Sure, you've got to write it down. You've got to be able to produce the words. You can edit that. You could use Chat GPT. You could use Grammarly, a whole variety of things to get really good copy. But you've got to put your own stamp on it, and then you have to figure out, how am I going to get that out there? How's it going to communicate both in print and also in social media? And to me, there's a whole skill there. And that's why I was very grateful when you and I ran an experimental Facebook page. You encouraged me to set up a Facebook page, if you remember, called Live on Air. I've since taken it down, but with very little financial input. I think you got us up to about 60,000.
It was quite a substantial reach. I mean, like, that was back when the CPMs, or cost per, cost per mile, was significantly lower than it is now, and we were able to reach, must have been like over 2.5 million people with, a very bootstrap type of budget, just because we were able to identify, I guess, talking about the things you were just mentioning before, like, the concept and design. That was a concept that we had with Live on Air, and how could we design ad creatives and promote it to an audience that was going to respond and engage to it in an effective way. Let's come to what you like, your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
What were some of the first videos that you put up, and how long did it take you to develop the ideas and the content for the video, film it, and then edit it in the format that you were happy with?
It took me about a year to learn how to do the video editing. I found that a really complex thing. And then, because of my work situation, a Methodist church was able at that stage to supply me with Adobe Creative Suite software, which immediately made page layout design so much easier through the InDesign program. And their video editing suite, I think, was very, very good indeed. Today, I use Affinity, the Affinity program for page design, for processing photos, and their design program, their vector drawing program, is excellent. And for video, I think DaVinci, the free version of DaVinci Resolve, is absolutely superb. As an absolute amateur, in my opinion, as good as the Adobe Creative Suite one.
Yeah. Is it did you have a particular theme for the videos? Were you talking about stuff related to Methodist theology? And I suppose that kind of ties into, I guess, another question that I had for you before, which I didn't quite get the chance to ask, is what do you think the advantages are of the Methodist faith, and how did you incorporate those advantages into the videos that you went on to make?
Okay, I did make most of my videos about theology and associated things. For example, I wanted at an early stage to retell the story of Adam and Eve and evolution. How do you marry up the Bible with the scientific account? Now, I think the two go hand in glove because they're talking about somewhat different things. Um, so that's the kind of theology that I was trying to get across. Now, the market is very, very limited there because you've got the fundamentalist American right on one side and you've got the scientific community on the other side, and never the twain shall meet, except maybe in the last 30, 40 years, there's been a much more genuine dialogue at a kind of a more advanced level. So I wanted to make, well, I wrote a book about that as a guide for young people, and I made a lot of spin-off videos around that. So my professional capacity as a Methodist minister enabled me to have a whole lot of different ideas that I could turn into content, both in print form and in video form. It took me a long time. I'm still not comfortable in front of a camera. I'm much more comfortable if I can talk to a congregation because of the eye contact, because of the face-to-face thing. But I recognize that the world now basically runs on Zoom meetings and Google meetups and you name it. But I think it's a harder medium to achieve a successful communication. I think you have to practice it. So, when I look at some of the ways in which you've been assisting your client base and helping them through YouTube, I think you have hit the nail on the head. You are aiming for a niche, and the niche will respond. So in the last, say, couple of years, I've been really interested in talking about some of the world's greatest poems from the field of literature. And I'll take one poem and I'll illustrate it. I do all my own illustrations now. When we first started, I had two marvelous artists in the congregation who illustrated all my books for me. Now I illustrate my own works. And it's this idea of speaking to a niche audience. I'm speaking to a group who will respond to the poems that I think have fantastic theological implications, talk far more about God than a million sermons. Okay, so I've got a small group, but I'm happy just to produce for that small group. If you can turn me into the same level as some of your super giants on YouTube, that's fantastic, but it's not what I'm looking for.
But I mean, it's your place. You've got almost no competition with a lot of these topics that you're talking about. I mean, you may have, a couple of the bigger theologians talking and discussing, say, like Adam and Eve and evolution that you mentioned just before. But when it comes to talking about the other aspects, I mean, I'm looking right here at your YouTube channel right now. Your most popular videos are A Time for Faith, So Me Goes Missing, 60 Years, Kiwi Connection, Practical Theology. And I believe was that the discussion that you had with Peter Lynham?
Yeah.
Did really well.
Yeah, a number of them did do quite well. About 3 or 4 years ago, I made a video that mentioned a very famous figure in the history of the University of Jerusalem. He was one of the founding figures there, a guy called Emanuel Velikovsky. And he also wrote a number of books on science and early geology. And the scientific community absolutely hated what he wrote. They thought his science was rubbish. But here he was a highly prominent Jewish psychiatrist. He knew his stuff in one way, but he didn't necessarily know it in another way. Now, I did a video on Velikovsky and another guy called Samuel Butler that used to write theology in the 1860s up in the high country of the Rangitata in the South Island. Another guy who was marginalized by the scientific community of his time. He had a major, major argument with Charles Darwin. So you had Velikovsky and you had Samuel Butler. And I made this video simply for myself. And it became one of my most watched and commented on
Wow.
videos. And the reason was that the conspiracy theorists in America, they love figures like Velikovsky because he appears anti-establishment. And so I was getting all these comments from people who said, "Oh, you're too hard on Velikovsky," and all of that kind of thing. So at the end of the day, what I realized was I'm talking about something that interests me. I may not convert a single person to that point of view, but at least the opportunity for dialogue is out there.
Yeah, and I think that has become a big problem in a lot of places these days where people with differing views can't actually have meaningful dialogues because I would say there's probably quite a few things that we think about differently, probably politically or definitely politically, and also from a even possibly from a theological perspective. But that doesn't mean we immediately think of the other person as inferior or the person with the lesser view. I think a lot of the time both of us are quite prepared to accept that we may we may have the inferior view, but might just be a bit more persuasive. You never know. Um,
Well, I think you're highlighting something that you're instinctively doing in the social media realm, and that is you're allowing your clients to form their own opinions. You want some guidance. You want to give them some guidance. They want some guidance. But in the final analysis, how well their business succeeds is over to them, how they handle it. And yeah, I've certainly appreciated in the past all the arguments we've had, and we have had some real arguments
some
to
real
it.
stingers, yeah. But it's been good because I think that's how you learn, and you have to be prepared to accept that you may come to the point where you've known someone for most of their life, and there's still things that you will just always disagree with them on. And you were actually the one that told me this actually set me quite well up for marriage, actually, which was um, we discussed the most common reason why a lot of people get divorced in America was something called irreconcilable differences. And you said to me over a cup of coffee one morning, you said, Stuart, even the most happily married couple have plenty of irreconcilable differences, and it all comes down to whether or not you can just put those things to one side and find some common ground. And I've always kind of taken that in my stride, but especially as well in searching for that YouTube niche because I've talked with plenty of people with much bigger channels than I have, and the advice that they've given and that I've implemented has not always paid off and it hasn't always been successful. And I think what you mentioned earlier on about talking about things that you're actually interested in, I find it the same way as well with the YouTube channel here, like making content that I'm actually interested in because I was generally interested to find out what Quora ads were all about because I saw them quite a bit going onto the platform, but I never actually knew how they were set up. I didn't know the type of audience targeting that you could do, didn't know the coding and the sort of pixel tracking and events that you had to set up with it. And it looked like quite an interesting platform, mainly because people often go onto the platform with a very specific type of interest. And I think in the same way as well with your stuff, people would have to have a very specific interest, but you were also able to push YouTube advertising quite successfully in front of a lot of people, like your video on the 60 years of practical theology. You mentioned the average watch time on that. Was it over 10 minutes for a 52-minute video?
Something around that figure, maybe a bit less. I can't remember off the top of my head, but
Hmm.
yeah.
How long did
Um,
it take you to get acquainted with like the potential of advertising with YouTube? And were you doing videos that were like skippable in-stream ads, or was it like sort of like display video ads? Do you remember?
Well, both, and I had zero expertise. I wish I'd had your channel when I first started. But at that stage, I was principal of the Trinity Methodist Theological College, and a lot of the videos were being made so that students could come back and view the theology content. And so they were the ones that really got advertising, because I had an advertising budget to play with. I haven't had an advertising budget now since 2016 or something like that. So at the time, pardon me, we were able to, I guess I sort of blundered around in the dark with the advertising, and sometimes I got lucky, sometimes I didn't. But I do remember when you first set up the live on air page on Facebook, you said something to me that I was highly counterintuitive, and I thought, Stuart's wrong on this, but let's see what happens. Now, it turned out that you are absolutely right. I think your hashtags and all the things where you were directing that ad were actually to atheists and agnostics in Britain.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever had as many reactions as I got on Facebook, out of that particular post. And dare I say it, though a few of them were a bit derogatory, like, what's that crazy old man saying kind of thing. Most of them were sort of saying, hey, you're very sincere, but we think you're wrong. Here's why.
Let's talk a little bit more about engagement and also the power that a like or the thumbs up button or thumbs down button on the video has. How have you found that has impacted on your video's popularity and the amount of other engagement that it can produce?
Again, that's a very interesting question. I found that when I first started in YouTube, I was always very happy with a lot of likes, particularly if we'd put advertising money into those initial videos. Today, I'm far less interested in the thumbs up button. I hardly ever get any thumbs down, and they're all private now anyway. So it's no longer as direct form of positive negative as it used to be. But what I have appreciated far more is when critical comment arises, it gives me the opportunity to restate the opposition's point of view, which I always try to do in a post, and B, to then add, have you thought about? So it becomes far less, did they like it, but much more a genuine dialogue. Now, my belief is that a lot of the YouTube content creators don't want genuine dialogue. They just want the sheer thrill of, oh, I got 40,000 likes or whatever. Those things don't get to the heart of why we're creating the content. You and I, when we put together 3 minutes of your time, it was to be a print version, and we both recognized that meant people would approach it differently to a YouTube video. They would approach it as if it were an altogether more serious kind of thing. YouTube videos are, well, I don't know how many billions of hours are uploaded every day or every year, but it's hard to take it 100% seriously unless you can get some serious content into it.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, yeah. So I've become much more interested in the engagement, and I like the way YouTube has now, through the polls, etc., allowed for pursuing a better form of dialogue. And ultimately, isn't that what, when we used to go to a play, when we used to go to a movie, when we used to go to a club or whatever for our entertainment, it was always a two-way process. The more a YouTube content creator can allow for that two-way process to emerge, it's not going to be there when someone first watches, but will they be sufficiently interested to begin the dialogue? And that's the key question.
Yeah, and that opens up the discussion about the community aspect of it as well that emerges as a result of that when people are having that level of interaction. Because I listened to an interview with Sam Ovens, who was the founder of consulting.com, and he now runs I think it's a software as a service company called School, which basically allows people to have a community group of people that subscribe to their business offering or model, whatever it is, and it makes it as easy as possible for people to not only have their course or content material, but also have that community platform as well, where people can ask questions, can provide input, can upload ideas and thoughts, and there could be community like subscriber notes if someone's running different tests or there's different research findings that have come up as a result. And it's all about creating an effective community, because he found when he created consulting.com, things were all over the place. You would have Kajabi or whatever course platform host was in one place, you'd have Facebook groups in the other place, and it would just start to get really disjointed. And he wanted to just bring it all together and have that effective community. And I think what your channel has done so effectively is that it's brought all of the things that are, I guess, great about theology and, like, practical theology, as you would say, and bringing it all into one place, because you've done quite a lot of videos over your time. I mean, you may not have uploaded for quite a while, but you've done hundreds and hundreds of videos about a whole range of different things, and yet every single one of them has some sort of discussion and community or micro community that could be reached and engaged in an effective way. Because we did a few film reviews as well at one point, where we'd go and watch the film and then we'd head straight down to Trinity Methodist Church, and then we would just go and record our review and our take on it. And it was actually very effective.
Oh, it was a great thing when you got me into the film reviews. But Stuart, it raises a question that I'd like to ask you. Though my channel is at Practical Theology, if you like, what do you think about channels that have different kinds of content in the one channel? Is that a good strategy from your marketing perspective, or would you prefer content creators to create specific channels for specific topics?
Sometimes it can be quite interesting to see people that have different types of content going on a singular channel. There's one girl who I came across a couple of years ago who had a channel where she did discussions about makeup and makeup tutorials, but she also covered true crime stories as well, which such a contrast, but it's something that she was interested in, and she seemed to really just capture both communities quite well, and obviously labeled it very specifically and had a good thumbnail to match it. But she had over 100,000 subscribers on that, and my thinking there is she managed to capture two different types of audiences. She had your people interested in makeup and your people interested in true crime. And depending on what day of the week it was, people knew that on those particular days, they were either interested in it, they weren't, or it was both, where they were interested in both makeup and they were interested in true crime as well. Mostly, I imagine, the female audience for the final one. But then you have other ones like, I mean, my friend Stuart has got a channel which covers everything related to small business marketing, like tools and tips and that sort of thing. And I think he's beginning to discover more and more, whether it's sort of conscious or subconscious, that he seems to be moving more towards like CRM systems and talking a lot more about those and the benefits which it has, because a lot of his business audience is small business owners that are looking for ways to be more actionable. And I think a great way to be actionable is actually nurturing the community that you have and turning them into sales, long-term customers, or providing as much value upfront as possible to leads and getting their feedback so that they eventually, hopefully, do turn into customers. And I think he's done quite a fantastic job identifying a lot of these CRM systems, but he still does tutorials as well on sort of like the bigger stuff like setting up a Gmail account or G Suite series, how to create a Facebook page and so on, but frequently less so and more sort of into the CRM systems. And it's interesting. Like, I think some people can pull it off very well. Stuart's one example, and this girl that was talking about true crime and makeup tutorials is another example. But I think if you go across multiple different lines beyond just two things, I think that's when it becomes very murky. Like if you are talking about, for example, technology products, and then you're talking about, a golf swing, and then you're talking
Yeah.
about a car review, and then you're talking about some of the stationery that you got for your child because you're a father of two. I think that's when you really are trying to reach everybody and you reach ultimately maintain no one, because people will look at it, they'll see the video, they might go to your channel to look at the other videos, and if not a single thing interests them, they'll disappear. So I think you always have to be mindful of that side of things. So I guess with the girl that does the true crime and the makeup tutorials, she's quite lucky because she may have quite a lot of other true crime videos that people can go and enjoy. And same with the makeup tutorials and discussions, the same thing too. And for Stuart's one, he's got a lot of other tutorial videos on CRM systems, small business tips, and so on. So he's well covered. He's able to engage and retain people's attention more. And in the same way for you, you've got a lot of practical theology videos, but then if someone comes in on, say, Stuart Mannon's So Me series, there's plenty of other videos on that as well. So it's always, I guess, about your ability to retain people's attention on that one that can determine whether or not you can pull it off. I would say probably at the most you could maybe talk about 3 different things, but you have to have a very strict and rigid schedule on that. And I'd advise anybody that's just getting started out, if you are wanting to go down that path, you probably want to have about 5 or 6 videos of each particular topic ready to go so that you don't lose people after the first video.
Yeah, I think that's very wise because when we first set up the channel, we used, with permission, Stuart's videos on the So Many Music Stories for children, very young children, and they're highly popular. His print books and CDs that told the stories were worldwide sellers, Canada particularly, America, Australia, New Zealand. So it was very much an international kind of audience. He was an early childhood, or is an early childhood music educator. And I did a couple of videos with him initially where we talked about in what way was this practical theology? Why should we have these kids videos? And of course the answer is, a lot of churches use mainly music programs and all that kind of thing for their Sunday school work and Christian outreach with young people. So that's why we included it. But it's very clear from my statistics, you have one group that consists of 4 or 5-year-olds going into the SoMe stories. And when they've exhausted the SoMe stories, that's it. And then you've got this other, 400 plus videos on other aspects of practical theology that speak to a kind of I'm going to say an informed, well-educated theological viewing audience. So the two things, though we understand ourselves why they were linked, because they were both aspects of practical theology, but they were too diverse. So the thing that I think if I was doing it differently again, I would have set up a channel specifically around early childhood music education and done a lot more videos with Stuart on that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's change the topic a little bit more and discuss how you've seen YouTube change over time from when you first got into it versus I guess your most recent upload. What have been the biggest things that have changed, and have you found those changes useful, or have they been, in your opinion, detrimental?
Again, that's a highly relevant question, because the biggest single change has been around monetization. And you would know all about that, Stuart. Monetization, I think, was very, very easy when I first started. I can't even remember what the rules were. You might have been able to monetize instantly. I honestly can't remember, but whatever they had wouldn't have been very much. Then I think about the time that you were starting to get interested, they changed it up to 1K subscribers to be able to monetize.
Yep.
Now, for me, that didn't matter because I wasn't aiming ever to make a profit from YouTube. I wanted the channel to be able to distribute the intellectual content. And there's a vast difference between the two. But I saw the agonies that they put you through. It was no trouble to me. I knew I was going to get to 1K subscribers in any event. And whether I think when you first saw my YouTube channel, you might have laughed because we thought we'd be able to get 2 or 3 cups of coffee per annum out of what they were paying me. Today, I mean, I could monetize if I wanted to, but I'm not interested in monetizing. My basic motivation remains: here's content that I feel, from my Christian motivation, could be usefully shared with people. It doesn't cost me anything to be on YouTube. The art and craft, if you like, that's behind making videos and so on, is something that I would have enjoyed doing whether I was getting paid for it or not by YouTube. But for people like you that would want to be able to make a profit from monetization, I mean a good enough profit from monetization, I think they're much tougher than they used to be. At the same time, I think they've given more creative tools than they ever did in the past.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective, talking about the creative tools aspect, because ultimately, I guess their goal is to keep people on the platform for as long as possible. And it goes down to the classic split down the middle, where people go onto YouTube to be entertained or educated. And I think you're talking about having multiple pieces of content, which we discussed just before. I think there needs to be that decision. Are you trying to educate or entertain? because you can do both. I mean, sometimes it does work, but very often it's very difficult to master unless you've got a supremely good editor. And with having those extra tools available, it gives you an advantage to keep building and growing an engaged audience, because we talked about that in 3 minutes of your time. And once again, there are 20 copies that I'm happy to give away, physical copies like the one I'm holding now. Just leave a comment down below, or you can always email info@stuartmacadam.com and just send me your shipping address and we'll get a copy out to you if you're one of the first 20 people to do that. And talking about building an engaged audience, I think you can't begin to build an engaged audience unless you actually know your audience, which is one of the first things that we talked about in creating a successful community of people. Why do you think so many churches out there don't have YouTube channels? Why aren't they doing a lot of these things that you've done, which is talking about some of the more difficult conversations like Adam and Eve and evolution, and talking about flawed philosophies and atheism and so on? Do you think it's just done out of because a lot of people within the church are possibly overworked, or they just haven't considered it as a way to get dialogues going? What's your thinking there, David?
Well, gee, that's a hard one to answer. My initial comment would be churches tend to be conservative in their approach. So it doesn't matter what church it is, it wants to work with things that it knows. And it knows the things that it wants to work with.
Yeah.
And they tend to be those direct people-to-people things.
Mm-hmm.
Much harder to create community online. The online community is transient. It's fickle. You can have a very genuine online community, but it must revolve around people who are doing similar things, wanting to do similar things. I belong to multiple Facebook groups around printmaking, art groups, if you like. And I meet many of those artists when they're doing exhibitions, or we go together to common classes. I'll go to their tutorials, that kind of thing. So I still have the face-to-face contact. What the online contact does is it gives me instant visual access to what they're creating. Now, that's the huge difference between generation. My generation was a very visual generation, but you did not have instant visualization. Today, you've got it. So there's where churches, I think, haven't successfully, or most of them haven't successfully understood. How do you work when you've got instant visual communication? You and I are having a very long interview now. We would have the same if we were having a cup of coffee, but the difference is you're now going to go away and edit this content down at the coffee shop. It's over and done with. So social media gives you both an instant thing and also something that can be worked on into the future. The only other thing that could do that in the past was the print media. Now, this is another kind of printing that I do.
Hold the copy up higher, please. Yep, that's
yep.
good.
We make little, what are called artist books. So the artwork is collaged onto a sort of a fold-out book. That kind of artwork could sit on someone's desk or dresser or whatever for years if they liked it. And so and the same with a printed book. Your online recorded conversation does the same thing. It's sitting in a library that you and I can both go back to, or any of our viewers can go back to and watch again. Think about church on a Sunday. Could be the most fantastic sermon in the world. It could be the most boring sermon ever preached. But it's a once-only event. Now, a lot of churches don't realize what they're doing. They think, oh, well, if we video the sermon, we'll have a record like your video record or my book sitting on someone's shelf. You don't. If you record a sermon, you are, or any kind of church event, you are not doing anything creative at all. It's the most boring thing in the world to have to look at someone on television, on screen rather, preaching a sermon. It's nothing compared to the live event. So what I'm suggesting is that churches don't know how to they don't know how to curate their content correctly. If you're a YouTube content creator, you are curating that content for a very long time to come. And that's the difference. The average church does not know how to curate the content that they do on a Sunday morning.
Okay, well, David, thanks so much for coming onto the show today. If you're interested in finding David's channel, there's a link to that in the description box below. Once again, if you are interested in getting a copy of 3 minutes of your time, tips for effective social media engagement, there's 20 copies that we're going to give away. We'll add the instructions for getting one of those in the description box too. And David, is there anything you wanted to say before we sign off today?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Stuart, for not only having me on your channel today, but also for the fantastic friendship we've had over the years since we first collaborated on those books and film reviews. Thank you.
No worries. All right. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see you in next week's podcast. Bye for now.